your life.
Assalamualaikum. We're just waiting for people to hop in, be like 5 minutes or so. Assalamualaikum. All right, Assalamualaikum. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. All right. Thanks for everyone for hopping on. I think we're gonna go ahead and get started now, inshallah. So as you guys know, this is the intro to programming slides. So we're gonna go through. So let's get started. So also just ignore if I look over there. I have the chat running, so if anyone says anything, I could always see. So today I'll just give a little bit of background, start off with. So about me, I am a senior at Rutgers University here in New Jersey, studying computer engineering, and I am starting to work at Amazon this summer, inshallah. I interviewed at different companies like Facebook and Microsoft, and I never knew how to code until I started college, freshman year in college. Before then, I'd never really touched a line of code. But yeah, that's pretty much about me. Other than that, I worked on different projects throughout the years, sort of picked up on like how to actually, go about getting your hands dirty and learning. And that's something we'll talk about today, so that hopefully you guys, inshallah, can get started on your own. So just one quote to start off with. Everyone in this country should learn to program a computer because it teaches you to think. And that's a quote from Steve Jobs. Now, I really like this quote because it talks about, like people always think like if you were to learn to program and whatnot, or if you're just learning to code, all you're gonna do is really just sit down at a computer and just like code all day long. Now, the reason I like this quote is because he talks about the fact that we're able to learn to think, and that teaches you, and we're going to get into this, how to actually solve problems and change the way you think. So right off the bat, we're going to get into misconceptions about coding, and I'm sure you guys have even thought about these things, but a lot of people say that it's all memorization. It's really not true. I know, like, maybe if you're learning like a language like French or whatnot, you might in class memorize like the different ways of saying hi, hello, whatever. But really, like when you're coding, you have access to different resources. You have access to the web where you can literally search anything you want to. So it's not all memorization, but I would say that you build up skill by sort of having muscle memory when you're coding. And there are other guys on this call, so feel free to chime in about this as well. But you need to work from everything from scratch. That's completely false. And that means that, and I mentioned this earlier, is that everything is not from scratch. You have access to all these like different resources you could build off of. So for instance, when I was a freshman in college, I worked on this Rutgers bus app. Um, Now, this bus app would basically track the different Rutgers buses, and it would sort of show everyone where the buses are in real time, where the buses are stopping, so students can see, like get an idea of where they're going and when the bus is going to come. Now, that was not from scratch. There are tons of Rutgers bus apps. I'm sure if you go on the App Store, you'll find them. And you can even do this in your own university and implement some sort of bus system for your university. And this would be a really great project to have. But basically, the way I did that was there was already pre-built data calls that I could do from Rutgers, and all I had to do was call that data, implement it into the app, and that's it. Like the buses would just appear on the map. Everything was set up, right? Google Maps tells you exactly how to set things up, right? So this is not something you would do from scratch. That's a huge misconception. But obviously there are certain different things that you do from scratch. So the next thing is there's no way to be creative while coding. And that's completely false because when you are coding, you have the ability to literally type whatever you want and create whatever you want. And I say that because when I'm making, for instance, like a mobile app, right? And I am designing where you're going to press on a button, what happens when you press on the button, I have the option and the ability to sort of dictate how you're interacting. And we see that as an example when you see Facebook, for instance, when you see Facebook videos, right? They did it in a way where, and obviously this is to tailor to their business, but they did it in a way where when you're watching videos on Facebook, you never have to scroll up to go to the next video. It automatically scrolls to the next video, and that's something that'll sort of keep you drawn in. Now that's sort of like a businessy way, but they have the creativity to be able to do those types of things. And then the last thing is it takes years to get into. So it does take years to get into if you want to excel to the point where you're becoming like a senior software engineer or something. And there are guys here that are more experienced than I am for sure that they can even speak to that. But in order to just get started on small little projects, some things you can actually talk about, for instance, in an interview or even just talk about to your friends and whatnot, it does not take years to get into. It's something you can just sit down, go on YouTube, figure out how to create a website and just do it in a day. It does not take years to get into. So that's another huge misconception. Okay, so why do I need to learn to code? Now, this is one of my actual like favorite reasons of why I sort of got into coding, and it's really like the path of least resistance to make a big splash, right? So when, for instance, when we see the story of how Elon Musk came to be, right? We see that he started off just working for PayPal. They called it X.com, I think, back then. And essentially what he would do is that he would code all day. It required zero money, right? He had his PayPal team to work with him as well. But it required zero money to launch PayPal. And him just coding all day and being able to launch a product like that with zero capital and then grow it to where it is today, right? It gave him that fuel to sort of make the impact that he has today, right? We know he's doing things like with Tesla and everything like that. He has a step-by-step plan, right? All this happened just because he's had that capital built off from when he started at PayPal. And then make your life easier. So I started off in a small project working on, so there was this light in my room and I wanted to basically automate the light turning on and off. And the reason I had to do that is because my light bulb was broken and I couldn't, turn the light on and off myself. I would have to unscrew the light bulb or unscrew the lamp. And I thought about like, how can I do this in a way where I wouldn't have to spend money on a new lamp and I could just sort of, just speak and make it happen, right? So I looked it up online and I found that people have already done this before. People have used like Google Voice Assistant and, Alexa to sort of automate the things in the house, right? This is called house automation using Internet of Things, right? So that really makes your life easier if you're able to just sort of write a few lines of code to give your system an input and have something happen in the real world, right? And then also change the way you think about real problems. So this is obviously a little bit vague, but really like over time, you'll start to notice how when you go about solving these different problems, for instance, like how to optimize the way people are accessing YouTube right now, where you're streaming live on YouTube, how is all that data being sent to every single computer, right? How do we optimize that and scale that to such a way where literally everyone can watch this at the ease of their home, right? Thinking about problems in different ways in a software engineering sense, like scalability and whatnot, really changes the way you think about other problems in your life. And then last thing, and I talked about this before, is create anything, right? You have the ability to just write a few lines of code and then create anything you put your mind to, right? We see that the creators of Minecraft created this whole world for people to just go into and, like do their own thing, right? So you have the ability to just write a few lines of code and make literally anything you put your mind to. So solution-oriented thinking, this is something that I talked about previously. Solution-oriented thinking is how your mind is going to sort of develop in a way where you think in a way that will solve the solution the best way possible. And the first step to that is identifying the actual problem, right? So what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? So for instance, when I had a project, and I'll get into this later, it's called Class Hub, right? We had a problem, and it was a semester-long project. We had a problem that we were trying to solve, which was the class at a large scale, like a large lecture. I'm sure you guys have experienced this before. It's really hard for the professor to sort of reach different students that have questions. It's hard to sort of facilitate a poll in real time with all these different students. It's hard to take attendance, right? These are all different problems that we identified, and we had to figure out how to solve that. Now, the next step is analyzing from the right perspective, right? So by that, you cannot just solve a problem by looking at it one way. It takes different angles, it takes different lines of sight to sort of see that. And we see that it works really well when you work in a team to sort of solve a problem. So when we were working in our team, right, one person suggested using a QR code to sign in, right? Using a QR code, everyone would go in the classroom, scan the QR code, and they're signed into class. Now, that's one perspective, but is that the best perspective to the solution? And the other perspective we had was, what if we use some way to use the phone's sort of signals, GPS, Wi-Fi, whatever, and map it to the other instructor's phone so that when the student walks into class, they're automatically signed into attendance, right? That's a really great solution that we came up with by using multiple perspectives. And then the third step, brute force, right? So you'll hear this term a lot in the industry. You'll hear this term when you're interviewing, etc. Brute force is essentially going at a solution at the most minimal and basic approach possible, just to get on the right track, right? Brute force is sort of, for instance, when we did our Class Hub app, right? The brute force method was to do this attendance based using QR codes and whatnot. The best solution, the optimized solution, right, is using sort of the seamless way of just walking into the classroom with your phone and signing into class without even doing anything, right? That's the optimized solution. And that's where we get to the last thing, is optimize, solve it better and minimize your edge cases. Your edge cases are like these little small things that you might not necessarily see at first, but you'll sort of come to see as you're going at a problem. And this is something you'll notice as you start to code and start to learn to code, is that code is never perfect right off the bat. You will make mistakes, you will encounter errors, and you will have to solve those edge cases. So that's the optimization step. But it's important to note that when you want to solve a problem, and this is solution-oriented thinking, is you don't want to just try to figure out the right solution right off the bat, right? You want to get the brute force solution first so that you can optimize it and make it better. This is how engineers think. This is how people in the industry go about it. This is real solution-oriented thinking, right? Optimizing a basic solution and making it better for people to use. And I gave this example before, but YouTube.com, right? It originally started off as just hosting videos online, and now we're streaming live to like a lot of people, right? Their brute force solution was just hosting videos online. And as they progressed, as they sort of looked at the different edge cases, they were able to optimize it, use better technology to make it better as it is today. So getting started by yourself, and I'm sure other guys can comment on this, but the one thing I see, and I try to advise to everyone really, is that when you want to get started, and everyone learns differently, but when you want to get started, the most important thing you can do is get your hands dirty. Now, getting your hands dirty means not watching videos for hours and hours, not waiting for school to teach you, literally just going on your computer, downloading some random code, just messing around with it, finding, what happens when I change this to this, what happens when I have an error, you'll break things, and that's okay. Like, you'll learn through getting your hands dirty. And that's the most important advice I can really give to anyone that's interested in coding, is really just don't wait for school. Don't just try to binge watch, tutorials after tutorials, really get down and dirty and just download code, mess around with it. And then sort of a broader topic is the interviewing stages, right? Now, this is something for the serious people here that actually like want to make a career out of it, right? Interviews, and there's different stages to it, but what do tech companies actually look for in interviews is really not really like how you code or how many languages you know, right? You can come, and I've done this before, you can come to an interview prepped and everything with your resume and have like hundred or not hundreds, but like tens of languages and like technologies listed on your resume. But that won't do anything if you're not passionate about a certain project, or you can't talk about a certain project that you worked on. You can't articulate what the tech helped you do, right? So learning all these languages, being able to have all these languages on your resume is not going to get you that. What's going to really sort of tailor your resume and tailor your skills to what the companies look for is being able to talk about a project that you're really passionate about. I use that project I mentioned called ClassHub. I use that in almost every interview I had into senior year, because that was something I was really passionate about solving, right? That's something that was relatable to us students, and that's something that the interviewers can see. As an undergrad student, I'd face that problem. I'd be able to solve that if I coded the solution to it. And then the next thing is, what can I expect during a coding interview? So coding interviews can be really different. The ones I've been through, and this is something I see common in even like bigger companies like Facebook and Google and whatnot, is they will always test you on data structures and algorithms. Data structures and algorithms is something we will get into if we have time. But basically, it's the way data is stored and how you go about solving a solution, right? And I guess I could talk about sort of my interview process as interviewing for Amazon. We started off by just doing this mass online coding sort of debugging thing. We had to look at the code they gave us, and we had a certain amount of time where we had to basically see where the problems were and how to fix it. It's more logical. It's not really about like knowing how to code in Java or knowing how to code in Python or whatever. It's mainly about sort of analyzing, if I'm looping through a list of numbers, am I able to access the last number if my limit is less than that or something like that. It's like really logical, these smaller problems. Now the next stage of that was we had more advanced coding problems. There was 2 coding problems. We had 45 minutes, I think, total to do both. And what they want to see, and I remember I didn't even finish the second problem. I don't even think I got the first problem right, really, even, which was really surprising, that I was able to proceed in the interviews. But what they want to see is basically how you go about solving the solution. They don't want to see you get like 100 on both of the solutions. They want to see you be able to show and display how you're going about solving the solution. They want to see that brute force solution that I mentioned. They want to see if you have time, optimize that brute force solution, right? They're not expecting you to get that solution right off the bat or anything like that. And then lastly, what does preparing look like? So for me personally, and I know other guys can sort of talk about their own experience, but for me personally, I went through, I guess, almost the end of summer until halfway through fall semester, just doing coding problems every day. And I can show you guys this website that I use, and I'm sure you guys who are into this have heard of it before. It's called leetcode.com. Basically, they have like a lot of different problems, and you see I've done these before. Like for instance, this one's literally just finding the sum of 2 numbers in a list that sum up to a target, right? They give you code, you can select whatever language you want to do. And I would just do these problems essentially every day, at least one a day, just to sort of keep my skill up for these coding problems. So this is something that anyone has access to prepare for an interview. Okay, so the next thing, we're getting towards the bigger things in the interview, is a look ahead, right? So we have the 2 things I mentioned, which is the data structures and the algorithm. So for those that are not really accustomed to coding yet, or maybe they haven't even touched line of code or anything, completely, this is nothing for you to worry about right now. You have to worry about, learning to code, just sort of getting your hands dirty at first and getting used to how you're going about learning and finding the best way for you to learn. But for those of you that are at the point where, I learned a little bit about Java, I learned a little bit about Python, whatever, and I want to start preparing for an interview. I want to start getting an internship. You know, I'm a sophomore in college and I want an internship this summer, and then I want to set myself up for a full-time job when I graduate. All right, these are two things that you really need to look into. So the first thing is an algorithm, right? What is an algorithm? An algorithm is just taking anything and putting it into some system and getting an output. And there's a set of rules that the input follows in order to get to the output. And we follow this in our day-to-day life even, right? Lives. We like our daily algorithm is like getting up, you know, praying our salah and then having breakfast and studying. That's our algorithm, right? This is what we do, X, Y, Z to get A, B, C, right? This is something we put in and this is the output we get. That's our algorithm. Algorithms can be very diverse in code, right? There's different algorithms for different things like sorting lists and whatever, but this is something you're gonna need to get into. This is just something that everyone will want to ask you in an interview because this really shows you how you think about different problems. And then data structures. So there are 3 data structures I chose to display here. There are many to pick from. Basically, data structures are just an idea in computer science of how you structure your data, essentially, right? So the first one here, if you can see my mouse, is it says push pop, right? This is called a stack, and it's really easy to think about something in terms of data structures because you can relate it to real life, right? A stack is essentially a stack of items, right? A stack of data. So if you take like a book stack or a pancake stack, you're stacking those up. You can only access the top element on the stack, etc. Right? You can push an element on the top, or you can take it out, just like a book on a stack. And then a queue, right? We've seen queues at Costco lines. We've seen queues everywhere, right? This is something that we use for data structures, and this is something you'll be tested on in interviews and everything. But this is something that you can relate to in real life, right? In queuing and dequeuing, those are the 2 things you can do with the queue, right? You can only go to the back of the line, or you can only leave from the front of the line. You can't go from the front of the line. You can't leave from the back of the line, or you can in real life. But in data, it doesn't work like that. And then the last thing, probably one of my favorites and most interesting is the graph, right? So if we see here, if you guys can see this, we have John on the right, who's friends with Mary, who's friends with Francis. John is related to Mary, but not Francis. But you can see that John likes the Beatles and Francis likes the Beatles. So if you were to take something like this, right, we have basically huge systems like Facebook and whatever that do this automatically for us. When you look at, you know, like for instance, someone liking a certain thing like the Beatles and someone else liking a certain thing like the Beatles, you can recommend that friend to that person, right? This way you structure data, this way you structure people essentially in a friend social network is how you can come up with like bigger things, bigger ideas, right? Okay, if John is related to Mary and Mary's related to Francis and they both like Beatles, that means John could be a friend of Francis. And so you suggest Francis to be a friend of John, right? So data structures are really fundamental core things that people ask for. And I know it might seem intimidating to the people that are sort of just getting started. But the way data works is really important if you're wanting to get into like the interview stages of things. Does anyone else have anything to add, by the way? You can feel free to interrupt me. There's a few number of guys on this call. Anyone?
No, you're good. You're good for now.
All right. And then a couple of takeaways. I breezed through these slides a lot quicker than I thought I was, but a couple of takeaways. Don't wait for school to teach you, right? You don't want to wait for school to teach you because you want to get your hands dirty. You want to really just mess around with code, mess around with it, figure out how you can sort of understand it by just looking at it and breaking things. If you're expecting school to teach you what you want and teach you how to code, you're completely mistaken because they'll teach you at most like, you know, the syntax of things, how to speak that language, right? How to code in Java, but they won't teach you really how to think in the right way. How you think in that right way really develops from you getting your hands dirty, you know, doing things that, you know, you have to figure out on your own. And this is hopefully why I think you guys are here, right? To figure out how to self-learn. And then ask questions, right? You have literally the internet, and I'll show you guys this website. I'm sure the guys that code have seen this before. It's called Stack Overflow. Not a single project I've done ever has ever not used Stack Overflow, right? So how to traverse an array in Java. Literally, if I search that, I'll get a huge number of questions that people have already asked. If people ask these questions, that means people have already solved them. And that means you can look at those questions and find the solution, right? Someone already did that. So exactly, they have all these online resources. You don't have to memorize anything. You just have to, have the impulse to look at the solutions, have the drive to learn, and persistence to keep learning and taking initiative at problems that you face. And then the third thing is reach out, right? And we'll get into this later, but basically, you guys have, especially the guys in YM, have this huge network of people that have gone through certain things that they've already gone through, right? You can reach out to them and just sort of learn from them, have them as a mentor and sort of figure out, if they did this, how did it work out for them? How can I go about coding? I know everyone can reach out to me, and there's other guys that you can reach out to. So always reach out to your network. And then the last thing, the most important thing I kept stressing this entire time is getting your hands dirty, right? I mentioned this time and time again, but you will not effectively learn how to code if you're thinking you're going to learn how to code just by watching YouTube videos, just by, waiting for school. You will only learn how to code effectively by getting your hands dirty and actually messing with code and figuring out, why does this break when I do this? Why does the variable affect it this way? Different things like that. And then mentorship. So we mentioned this previously, but we have set up this link. Essentially, anyone who's serious about getting mentored, we will pair mentors with anyone that's actually interested. So if you fill out this form, the QR code is here, so you guys feel free to scan it, and the link is there. But essentially, with the number of people that do this, we'll try to find the matching number of mentors, and you'll get sort of this personal mentorship program built for you, where you can have someone to work with and sort of build through your skills. So I'll just leave this code up here for a little bit. If anyone wants to scan this. Does anyone else have anything to add? Hadi, anyone else on the call? Maz, you got to say something.
Yeah, I can add a few things. Jazakallah khair. Appreciate you, Haj. So I just wanted to add on a little bit, basically reiterating a lot of what Wahad said about how technology really enables you and really taking on and learning how to code. So a few real world examples that I can give over the past few years. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm from Chicago and I work as a software engineer at Discover currently. I've been working for about 3 years now. I graduated in 2017. And over the past few years, I've had a lot of people through YM and close friends as well ask me, they're interested in coding. How can they get started? One of the best ways that you can get started is, like Wahaj mentioned in one of his slides, find a resource, right? I have been coding for 3 years. I became a resource for those people. So what I would do is I would actually meet up with them once a week at the library for about 2.5, 3 hours. And we would go over from the very basics programming concepts. As they were going through school, they were taking programming classes. They would come back to me and they would say, oh, we implemented this in class at this time, or, this helped us on our homework, so on and so forth. So my number one recommendation, if you're interested in coding and learning how to program, is definitely take advantage of this mentorship form and find a resource. Find someone who has experience that is willing to put in the time to help you. That way your learning and your growth will just excel at an amazing rate. That's one thing that I wanted to add, is definitely find a resource. The second thing that I wanted to add is technology. Learning how to code enables you in so many different ways. For example, I have a bunch of friends who wanted to start their own companies, right? Everybody wants to work for themselves. So a lot of people wanted to start their own companies, and to do that, you have to build a platform, right? If you want to build a website or an app, you essentially either build it yourself or you have to hire a team to build it for you. The problem is that if you don't have the background knowledge, you don't really know what's going into the app, right? You can't really understand how to put that app together. You're relying on someone else to do it for you. So for me, alhamdulillah, I have background experience, right? And I used all the knowledge that I have from work over these past few years. And I recently launched my own company. And yeah, I'm not the one who's developing it now, right? I don't work on the coding of it anymore. I handed it off to people, but I know the ins and outs of the entire architecture, right? I know when I want to implement something, this is how I want to go about it, and I can recommend it to my developers as well. So it gives you an added advantage in many different ways. Like if you wanted to start your own company too. So those are just a few things I wanted to add. One is resource, use people as resources. Number two is that technology enables you in many different ways.
Yep, that's definitely good. So I encourage you guys to definitely fill out that mentorship form. I'm gonna move on from the QR code, so just scan it real quick. And I think someone posted the link in the live stream. So, and then the last thing I'll leave you guys with is resources. I think we're gonna be posting these somewhere. I'll go through some of these right now just so you can get a feel of them. Before I do that, and then we'll end off, I'll just sort of talk about my projects here. So this is that Rutgers bus app that I worked on. It's sort of that brute force solution that I talked about, where I'm getting the data from Rutgers, right? And I'm just pinning the buses on the map just so people can see them. That was sort of the initial approach. And then as we progressed, right, we optimized that solution. Now we have actual buses on the map. I didn't just change the icon. Those buses, if there was a video, they'd be moving. They have the speed, they have the ID and whatever, so people can see exactly when the buses are stopping and which direction the buses are going. Now, this is something that like it does not take a genius to do. There's tons of apps that already done this, but I really just wanted to get my hands dirty and just get started on a project. So this is what I did freshman year. And then fast forward to junior year in college, I worked on this class app that I talked about with the team. Basically, I think I showed you guys this already, but they launch a session, and when they launch, it launches live to the other students, right? The instructor's on the right side, the students on the left side. The instructor can launch a quiz. They can put out whatever sessions. The UI completely sucks and everything like that. But the point is, you're getting the project done. You're being able to talk. You're able to talk about it during an interview and whatnot, right? This is something we worked on. This is literally what I used to get through every interview that I had. The instructor can record audio per message, so they don't have to, scream across the lecture room, etc. So we're solving problems that way. And then for beginner resources, I definitely recommend Free Code Camp. I recommend this to anyone that's trying to learn coding. Essentially, they have like different courses on, like the basics of different things. So if I want to learn the basics of HTML, I just click on this and then they talk about it right here. You just have to read through it. It really takes just time just sitting down and getting through it. And then, like I said, also, you can literally just copy and paste this and just mess around with it on your own, right? That's really getting your hands dirty. And then Stack Overflow already went through. This is for more of the advanced people that are actually, getting into working on a project and figuring out how to do things. And then CS50, this is a really great course that everyone can use. It's for free. You just take the course. It's on harvard.com. And they have lecture series on different CS fundamentals. This is like sort of the school version of learning all these things, but nevertheless, still helpful. And then LeetCode for sure. Definitely recommend for anyone trying to interview anywhere. All the interview questions come from here. You can do mock interviews and whatnot. It's really, really helpful. And then just some little fun thing I want to show you guys. So like I mentioned before, you don't need to ever build anything from scratch, right? This is something called Vision AI by Google Cloud. And if I wanted to implement this in my app, I could, but I can try it right here. And essentially when I click this, I can click on this cat image and it'll identify it as a cat, right? And it'll pull different data from that image that I post. So let's see, did it work? I'm gonna refresh. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah, so here it's loading the cat image, and you could literally implement this in any project you want for free. It tells you, okay, it thinks it's a cat 95%. It labels it as cat, mammal, based on the percentage. You can literally pull this data. You don't have to build anything from scratch. It's just an API that you use and you can implement from your own properties, etc. It's really cool stuff. They have everything. Like you could literally search out how to do anything and you'll find probably an API for it that's already done. And last thing again is the mentorship form. So if you guys want a mentor, just feel free to fill that out. So I think that's it for me. I think we're gonna open it up to Q&A now. I'll just keep the QR code here for now, for anyone that wants it. But yeah, Hadi, I think we're gonna do Q&A.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, bro, for you and Maz. Really appreciate that stuff. So we've been actually writing down a lot of the questions that we've been seeing in the chat, and we also have some commonly asked questions that people usually have. For the people asking in the chat, the first thing is if this recording will be posted. Yes, it will be. It will actually be just saved as a YouTube video on our YouTube channel. So you can just come back to our YouTube channel and click on this video, and it'll be right there. You have the mentorship form over here, and then if you want to come back later and look at the links that Wahaj posted up for resources, you can also refer to those as well. So we'll start off with the Q&A. We'll start off pretty light. Somebody asked here, what's the best programming language to learn for beginners? What do you guys recommend?
So I'm sure Maz has his own answer, but I think for me, the first coding language I ever learned was Java, just because they taught it at school. That was at the stage where I didn't really, get into coding. But after that, if I had to recommend any language, it'd probably be JavaScript, just because it's a little bit of simpler language to learn, and you could really do anything right off the bat. You can build a website, you can build a mobile app based on JavaScript, all JavaScript. So, but yeah, Maz, do you have anything?
The first one I actually learned was Python, and really simple. I think as a beginner, especially, the one that I utilize the most, especially over the past 3 years, is Java. Really, I think if you get down syntax, like you mentioned, in school you learn syntax. If you get down syntax in almost any language, it's really a matter of learning how to transfer it over. But if to get started, yeah, JavaScript is good. Python is also a good place to start, I think.
Yeah, I think a good thing to mention is, like, regardless of whatever language you want to learn, it really comes down to sort of like the fundamentals that you learn. So if we look at like English or French, they're all based on Latin, right? But if we look at all these programming languages, a lot of them have similarities, right? A lot of them have these control structures called like if, else statements, right? Case statements, functions, and whatever. They all have these fundamentals to them, but the way you sort of speak that code is different. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on what your favorite is. But I just recommend just getting your hands dirty again.
I appreciate it. So the next question is for people that are, this usually happens more at the high school stage and maybe in some very entry level college classes, but people usually start off with very basic languages like Scratch, and they usually get turned off with programming. So is there kind of a difference from these very basic languages that are usually taught at the high school level, maybe in an AP computer science class, versus actual programming? And what advice would you have for somebody that is turned off from some of those basic languages to maybe start learning again?
So I'd say, I mean, I've never used Scratch myself. I never took an AP computer science class or anything like that. I really just, I can't advise on whatever it's called. But I would just say, look into something that people actually use, like Java, Python, whatever, JavaScript, right? Look into something that people actually use, and then sort of get a feel for it, mess around with it, see how it is, and then you'll get an actual understanding of what coding's like.
Yeah, I think from my own experience, I also don't know what that is, but the difference between what you learn in school and what you utilize at work, really at work you utilize frameworks that have already been created and creative ways to get the job done. In school, you're really building from the ground up. You want to learn your fundamentals and get your syntax down and really get good. What I would recommend is get good at one language, or like get great at one language and proceed from there and kind of expand out. So a lot of people, what they try to do is learn like 5 different languages, and they're mediocre or okay at 5 different languages. It's not the best thing to do, right? Get really good at one and then expand from there. But really in school, you build your fundamentals. At work, you utilize frameworks and get really creative.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for that. A next question is more on the beginner side. So you guys talked about APIs and frameworks. Some guys might not know what that is. So can you explain what an API is and what some frameworks are, and what are the differences between frameworks?
So I think API stands for Application Programming Interface, if I recall correctly, but that doesn't really matter. API is just something you use from another, company or whatever to help you get started or to help you do something, right? So Google, like I showed you, has that Vision API that you can literally use and implement in your own project and do something with right off the bat. And frameworks is just sort of like something to help develop something without getting to the nitty gritty of like how things work. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Okay, and how about frameworks? So I know that's a little bit more on the more advanced side, but you have a lot of frameworks, especially in web development. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
So I mean, I use React probably. That's a framework on top of JavaScript. And what that does is it lets you use JavaScript code with a little bit of extra syntax to create websites and whatnot, and even mobile apps using very simple syntax. So it helps you save a lot of time. You don't have to use HTML, CSS, and all that. You can really sort of get creating bigger things without learning the nitty gritties of every single thing.
Yeah, exactly what Wahad said. APIs, consider them like a resource, right? You can get certain information, you can post certain information, different things like that. Like he mentioned, different companies have APIs that you can utilize. Like Wahad gave the example earlier of that Vision AI API, right? That's something that Google has already created for you to utilize. When you get to work, like in your actual career, you will probably create APIs for your company and other teams to utilize, and maybe other people as well out there. And frameworks, just like Wahad's mentioned, they make things easier for you. It's as simple as that. Like you don't have to worry about the nitty gritty, like you said. It's meant to just give you a nice package, and you can unwrap it and use it.
Awesome. So the next rounds of questions, I'll deviate a little bit from tools, but we'll get back to that. I'll ask you guys a few questions about maybe some like development tools that you guys commonly use. But the next round of questions we have is around curriculums for college students. So we usually see a lot of colleges have, I would say, usually two majors, sometimes three. So you'll have your computer science major, you'll have your computer engineering major, and then sometimes you might have a IT major or a management information systems major. So for somebody that's maybe coming in as a freshman in college or somebody that's getting ready to declare a major, what advice would you give them to I guess, filter between those three majors and start their course in college?
So yeah, I've heard this question a lot from different people. I would say if you're trying to get into only software, like creating apps and websites or whatever, just major in CS. Don't worry about anything else. I majored in computer engineering, which is different from CS at Rutgers. Computer engineering is more hardware based, with a little bit of programming. Basically, they go over like different hardware aspects of creating hardware. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone that's doing software because that's just a waste of time in my opinion. But if you're into that hardware stuff, then you can go that route. And then the other thing I think other guys can speak to this more is IT. This is sort of like taking a little bit of software and mixing with business and whatnot. Hadi, I think you have more experience to speak on that.
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. And again, like you said, it's a very common question. So I actually studied computer science myself, but in my day-to-day job, I do not do any coding. Sometimes I'll do it, but it's very, very rare. And it'll only be in cases where, maybe I need to analyze some data or I need to maybe help out our development team. But I don't really touch code too much. So as I was going through the computer science curriculum, I realized I really, really like the tech side, and I want to stay on the technology side when it comes to, my job, right? I don't want to go into finance. I don't want to maybe go into mechanical or civil engineering. I really like staying in technology, but I feel like my strength is more on the functional solution design. And I feel like when it came to, development, I could do it for my courses, but like Wahaj mentioned, it really shows as a passion when you're going out of your way to learn it in your spare time. And I felt that I was better at the design side and I could do more on the design side as opposed to being a dedicated developer. So what that basically opened up for me once I made that decision, I continued with my comp sci major, but in terms of a job, I went the business analyst route. And we'll talk about that in, I guess, a little bit, maybe in the next couple of questions, as maybe the different types of roles that you have that you can pursue in technology. But a business analyst is basically that person who analyzes your business requirements. So like Maz mentioned, he's working at Discover, they're building some type of technology. Well, you have some goals or requirements that you need that technology to achieve. And those requirements will usually come from your business folks who know absolutely nothing about technology, but they need that technology for their jobs. So the business analyst sits in the middle between the business folks and the developers, collects those requirements, organizes them, and presents them to the development team. Now, I guess where the computer science major and programming skills really came in handy was the solution design part that Wahaj talked about earlier, because even though I'm sitting in a functional role, I can foresee what a developer might need to do their job. And that helps me out a lot because I can ask more questions, I can do a little bit more and make a developer's life a lot easier. Now, in hindsight, I think if you want to go that route and staying on the functional side, if you start the computer science or computer engineering major and you realize, hey, maybe I don't want to code on my day-to-day, but I really want to stay on the tech side, maybe I want to do data analytics or something like that, then I would recommend switching to, if your school has an IT major, a management information systems major. I know Rutgers has a BATE major, business analytics and information technology major, where these majors, they'll kind of teach you that solution thinking that Wahaj talked about earlier, but you're not doing, programming assignments in your courses. You can always do them in your free time, but you don't need to do them as part of your courses. And, maybe you're not going to be a great developer. And obviously in college and maybe even high school, you don't want to get bad grades, right? So the IT major kind of opens itself up for people that might want to stay on the technology side, but don't want to code in their day-to-day. That was probably a long answer, but I think that's usually a common one that people have. And if you guys have anything to add.
That's it for me.
Yeah, I'm good.
Cool. Okay, let's see. We have a few more here, and I'm just keeping track of time. So some people, we talked about schooling. We talked about that schooling portion. Now I guess we'll jump into the internship questions. So you have people that are asking about, finishing up maybe their freshman year, sophomore year. They still want to develop their programming skills, but they may not know how qualified they are for an internship. So what their question is, what should they be focusing on maybe in their freshman, sophomore year? And what's the ideal timeline to actually start applying for internships, maybe at some of these big companies like the FANG companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, like you mentioned?
So, I mean, I'm going to start off, if you're in high school right now and you're already on this live stream, then you should just start coding right now and just figuring it out, if you like it. Don't waste any time. If you're a freshman or sophomore, I know they have different programs. Typically, internships cater towards those freshman and sophomore levels. That they don't really expect you to know how to code everything because you're that young. But they really just sort of look for your passion and if you're going out of your way to actually apply for these things, you're already a step ahead of a lot of other people. And then I would recommend just trying to get an internship by your sophomore year summer, but definitely get an internship by your junior year summer, just so you can have something set up for when you graduate, inshallah, and you'll have a full-time job by then, hopefully.
Cool. Let me see. I'm going through a few more here. Let's see. So going back to that computer science, computer engineering debate, does it really affect my job prospects if I choose one over the other?
Computer science versus what?
Computer engineering.
Oh, Not really. It really just comes down to, I mean, I don't even, like, in my opinion, you don't even need to major in either. You could major in something completely irrelevant, but as long as you know how to code, that's all you need, really, right? Just being able to code for interview and being able to talk about it. You don't even have to go to college, in my opinion, for that kind of stuff, but it's definitely good to have a degree. So I don't recommend not going to college. But the difference really is and then the reason I chose to stay in computer engineering that long is because it really teaches you how to think differently. It thinks like an engineer versus the CS courses are more sort of like tailored towards analytical thinking, algorithmic thinking, right? Thinking in terms of like different CS specific topics versus software engineering or computer engineering is mainly like solving actual problems, working with teams. I know for that class of project that I worked on, one of the CE classes that we took was called software engineering, even though it was a computer engineering under a computer engineering department. But that was probably their most valuable class because that really taught me how to work in a team, sort of lead a team, and to make a technology solution that actually solves a real problem.
Okay. So following up on that, this is another interesting question that I saw. When people usually, you presented Steve Jobs, for example, where people think of, the dropout entrepreneur or the dropout software developer. What advice would you give for people that are, maybe debating going to college or self-learning programming and trying to get a job directly that way?
So you said going to college versus self-learning?
Yeah, versus just self-learning and then getting a job directly and not going to college.
So I mean, I would recommend going to college either way, just because it's good to have that sort of baseline background and really anything. I'm not saying major in CS, but I am saying go to college if you can. But just making sure that you're getting your hands dirty and actually learning code, that will really go a long way.
Okay, cool. So we'll pivot back to some common tools. So one question I know some people have, and this might be a little preference based, is we have different tools like Eclipse, like Visual Studio, and then we know Apple has Xcode. What are some of your preferred tools, and what are, I guess, the differences between them that people should know at a basic level?
So, I mean, the tool does not matter at all, right? Different tools are catered towards different use cases. I know for Xcode, like you mentioned, that's more tailored towards developing for iOS, Mac OS, right? But really, you could code anything in a text editor and just run it, right? You don't need any fancy tool to do that. But what I personally use on a day-to-day basis, just because it has a lot of things that sort of speed up my work, is VS Code, Visual Studio Code by Microsoft. I don't know, Maz, do you use anything different?
Yeah, I've used Eclipse, IntelliJ, Visual Studio. Primarily, I work with IntelliJ right now, but yeah, it really doesn't make a difference in what tool you use. There's pros and cons to all of them. Some people like certain ones because they have dark mode instead of light mode. So it really just depends on your preference. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think we can all agree dark mode is always cooler.
Dude, I use light mode at work and my coworkers hate me. Like, goes off at me. But
that guy.
now I'm at home, so nobody cares.
Yeah. Somebody asked, so I guess going back to the resources, Waj, if you just want to shift to that resources slide. But somebody asked about common books you guys might use maybe for programming, or do you guys just rely, entirely on the internet? Obviously, the internet is very sufficient, but any good books you might recommend for people to learn?
There's this one book, I forgot what it's called. It's by Gil Lockman. It's like the most quintessential book that you'll probably hear in every YouTube video, whenever. But it basically goes over literally everything. I can't find it right now, but
I'll look it up for you.
Yeah, I'll look it up right now. Gil Lockman coding. If you look that up, I don't even know how to spell it. Let's see. Cracking the Coding Interview. That's what it's called. All right, Cracking the Coding Interview is a great book. I didn't actually read through it. I don't expect anyone to read through it, but it's a great book to sort of, I'll show you guys right now. It's a great book to sort of skim through and prepare for an interview right before. It'll go through different topics that literally all the FANG companies go through and ask. So this is a really great book. But I wouldn't recommend just going out and buy it. This is only for really like the people that are actually strongly preparing for an interview and might want to sort of brush up on topics really quickly.
One of the books that I would recommend that's really random. When I was starting off at Blue Cross Blue Shield, my first job, one of the things that they made mandatory on all the software engineers is we all had to become Java certified through Oracle. Oracle has a certification program, and you take an exam and you're certified in Java, right? So the book that I used to study for that, it's on Amazon. It's actually called the Study Guide. So Oracle Certified Associate Java Programmer 1 Study Guide. I thought that was an amazing book to go through for someone who either learn programming like for the first time. It breaks things down to the very fundamentals, or even if you're looking to review, maybe you're going through college or you just graduated and you want to review some of those skills, it's a really great book and I recommend it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So one last question on resources that we have here, more about data structures. Any dedicated resources or websites for, I guess, a data structure deep dive?
So Cracking the Coding Interview goes over everything, including data structures, algorithms, literally anything you need to go over that kind of stuff. So I'd recommend that. Other than that, there's YouTube videos that sort of illustrate the way different data structures might work. So those visuals might help you.
Awesome. So that is it for our major questions. So again, thank you everyone for your time for joining. If you guys have anything else to add, I'll keep a lookout on the chat box if anybody has any last second question. But if not, I think we're good to close out. 1 hour on time.
Dope.
Appreciate you, Wahaj. Jazakallah khair for going through this. And it's really tough to present programming in an hour. You did a great job.
Thank you. Thanks for hopping on, everyone.
So we had a few last second questions around switching to a CS major, but we talked about that earlier. So for the folks that asked that, just wait till this recording goes up and then you can review the Q&A session. There's one more question I just came off here. This is for someone that just graduated. They're saying they just graduated and they wanted to ask, if they're having trouble finding a job, any advice they can use to help land a position.
So I mean, I haven't gotten to that stage yet because I'm still, a senior. But some general advice I would say is just reach out to different people. Be direct and reach out to people on your LinkedIn network or whatever. It doesn't hurt to reach out to someone on your LinkedIn network and be like, hey, I recently graduated and I'm looking for XYZ position. I have blah, blah. Or even reach out in a better way by saying, hey, I'm interested in doing this. Would you offer any advice to me? So there's definitely a whole network of people that you can reach out to on LinkedIn and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Utilize your resources. Like Wahaj said, LinkedIn, but most importantly, people that you know, or people that you can get in contact with. Use anybody and everybody at a company, ask them for referrals, so on and so forth. And just apply often. A lot of people get kind of lazy as they go through college and apply either the month that they're graduating or maybe that same summer or something like that. A lot of people decide to apply really late. Apply as early as you can and as often as you can, and go through whatever interviews you get. Interviews are a way of practicing too. So if you can go through whatever kind of interviews you can land, it's a great way to keep practicing and owning your skills and hopefully, inshallah, getting closer to a position that you can land.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point. Taking literally any chance you get just to practice.
Yeah, I'll add one last point, especially because I experienced this myself. But it's, once you've graduated or you're about to graduate, if the job search is going slow, my advice would be to, pick up a skill like programming or maybe a specific technology that is really in demand. So like Wahaj briefly talked about Google Cloud, right? if you can spend a few weeks, maybe a month or two, trying to, learn the basics of that technology, maybe doing a self project with that and getting some good talking points on your resume, like Wahaj talked about. It's all about those talking points in an interview where you can showcase your passion, your ability to learn something, learn it fast and also learn it well. And obviously the timing right now with COVID, everybody's staying at home. So there's no, in my opinion, no better time to actually start learning some of this free stuff that's out there. So that is, I think, it for our Q&A session. Inshallah, I think we're good to close out. Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining. Wahaj, if you just want to wrap up for us, I'd appreciate it.
Yep. Thanks for everyone hopping on. And again, here's the QR code if you guys wanted that mentorship and hopped on late. All right, assalamu alaikum everyone.
Alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam.